Well, for more on Chinese travelers' changing tastes, I'm joined by Ed Rogers. He's the CEO and CIO of Rogers Investment Advisors. So let's get started. What are some of the new trends in Spring Festival travel by Chinese holidaymakers this year?
Good morning, Rachelle. Thanks very much for having me on the show. The trends that we're seeing are quite notable. The change in the kind of aspirational tourist to the experiential tourist. And what does this mean? It's a movement away from the group tours where everybody's doing the same thing at the same time to more individualized experiences where they're trying to reach some level of intellectual or emotional fulfillment through a different type of experience on their vacation.
And we are seeing Chinese tourists being more discerning about how they spend their money and the sort of experiences that they want. So how should companies and especially retailers adjust to this change?
It's a great question. What we think overall is that we're seeing a true range of tourists now. It's from low to medium to high budget travelers. China has them all. There are millions of Chinese tourists coming to Japan, and different retailing price points appeal to them. So from very high-end accommodations to still mid-level accommodations to even low-budget accommodations, all across the spectrum, you have to find a way to appeal to the Chinese traveler, today's Chinese traveler.
So Ed, give us some context. Just how valuable are Chinese tourists when it comes to global tourism overall?
Well, there's no doubt that in the travel industry, and again, I think you'd have to say at all price point levels, from the high to the medium to the low budget, that's the single most impactful change that the world has seen, is the growth of the Chinese middle and upper classes and their travel. And that's not just a Japan phenomenon. That's in France, that's in the UK, that's in the United States. The Chinese, Mrs. Li, if you will, is truly driving resource spend for multiple industries focused on tourism.
Now, we know that Chinese overall are much more tech savvy when it comes to what they do with mobile platforms. So what are some of the ways that technology continues to evolve to really meet the needs of Chinese travelers?
Well, I think you really have to look at what is online travel these days. How does everyone book accommodations? How do they find cars? How do they find restaurants? And clearly, the vendors need to be media savvy or online savvy as far as offering their wares on a consistent basis. So this means having Chinese language, for example, websites. This means having also on-site people who can respond to Chinese traveler queries in Mandarin, for example. So it's the combination of those things. It's the boots on the ground, people who can service the client, the tourist client in Mandarin, and also in an online context, facilitate their booking any type of reservation that you might think would be needed.
And with this growing number of Chinese tourists, they obviously have other needs, and it's not just things like hotels. Tell us about some of the business opportunities that come with this boost that we're seeing in Chinese travel.
Well, certainly one of the easiest things for us living here in Japan to point to would be, for example, everything around skiing in Japan. So we've recently had the Lunar New Year. That's a huge Chinese holiday. If you go to Niseko, you go to, well, actually any ski resort in Japan, and Japan has fantastic ski outlets, you'd feel that, and we were just skiing, I went skiing with my family 2 weeks ago. Honestly, I felt like 25 to 30% of the people on the mountain were Chinese. You hear Mandarin everywhere. And this means that the hotels, the restaurants, the people renting the skis, everyone is now impacted by this growing Chinese traveler market, and much to the good. So it drives spend in everything from how do I develop my next hotel site, what are the price points, do I want high-end, medium, low-end, what size accommodations do Chinese travelers like to stay in, what resources do they like to have for their children and their families, what foods do they like to eat, what are their gift-giving proclivities. All these things are impacted, and all these things are in the mind of the service provider, the vendor, something that you need to bear in mind now because you are catering to those Chinese tourists.
Well, thank you so much for your insights. Ed Rogers there of Rogers Investment Advisors.